This video explores strategic concepts from historical military literature for educational and analytical purposes. It is intended to examine leadership, decision-making, and strategic thinking, not to promote violence or harm. Viewer discretion is advised.
Welcome to The Explainer. Today, we're cracking open the wisdom of an ancient general, and we're going to translate these timeless battlefield tactics for the modern world, for the boardroom, the political stage, and even for your own creative projects. From your very first day in school, all the way to your first day on the job, you're told that success comes from following the plan, sticking to the rules. But what if that's only half the story? This whole breakdown is really built on a pretty radical idea, that true intelligence, it isn't about just raw aggression or blindly following orders. It's about profound adaptability. So that leads us right into our first big idea. In any kind of dynamic situation, a market, a political campaign, a war, rigid by-the-book thinking is just a fatal flaw. The best leaders, they get it. They understand that context is king, and sometimes that rulebook, it's the first thing you need to toss out.
Now, just let that sink in. This statement it's shocking, right? It's so direct and subversive. Sun Tzu is arguing that a leader who's actually on the ground, who sees the situation firsthand, has a duty to win that is more important than a command from some distant boss. See, the goal isn't just to follow orders, it's to win.
And you can see this playing out all over the modern world. It's exactly the same idea. A general has to adapt to the real terrain, not just the map they were given. And today's leaders have to act on real-time info. Think about the team leader who ignores an old directive from the CEO because new market data just came in, or the product manager who pivots away from the official plan because of user feedback. These aren't acts of rebellion, they're acts of strategic disobedience, and they're all driven by the real objective. So this forces us to ask a really tough question. Where is that line exactly? When does sticking to the plan become sabotage and breaking the rules become a stroke of genius? It's a tension that, really, every single leader has to figure out for themselves. Okay, so this idea of being flexible, it takes us to the next level of strategic thinking. See, it's not just enough to be adaptable. A leader has to build a balanced, realistic mindset. You've got to move past blind optimism, but also avoid that paralyzing pessimism. This right here is the absolute core of how a wise leader thinks. They don't just see the good stuff. For them, every opportunity and every risk are just two sides of the very same coin, and they are constantly weighing both. When you put them side by side like this, the difference is it's so clear. The unwise general just charges ahead, totally blind to the risk, and then gets completely blindsided when things go wrong. But the wise leader, they see that same opportunity, and the first thing they ask is, okay, where's the trap? When a crisis hits, they don't just see disaster, they see hidden leverage. It really makes you wonder, what's more dangerous in a leader? Overconfidence or too much fear? The wise leader, they manage to avoid both. And get this, that balanced mindset, it's not just for playing defense. It's the absolute key to going on offense. Because once you understand how to avoid the traps of overconfidence and fear in yourself, you suddenly get the power to create those exact traps for your opponents. This is where strategy shifts from an internal thing to external control. This is the art of psychological warfare. And the source, it gives you a devastatingly effective playbook for this. The goal isn't to force your opponent to do something, it's to make them want to do it. You present these specious allurements, which is basically just attractive but totally deceptive bait. It could be a tempting new market, a controversial statement that gets them angry, or what looks like a weak spot in your defense. Then you create a sense of urgency, and as they rush in to grab what they think is an easy win, they walk right into your trap. And that brings us to what might be the most important part of this whole breakdown. Because here's the thing, before you can ever defeat an opponent, you have to defeat the enemies inside your own head. The source identifies 5 dangerous faults, 5 psychological weaknesses that will absolutely destroy any leader from the inside out. All right, first up, recklessness. Now this isn't courage, it's a blind drive straight toward destruction. This is the leader who attacks without a plan, who thinks just being busy is the same as making progress. And the source is crystal clear on this one. This flaw leads to destruction. We see this everywhere, don't we? It's the startup founder burning through investment cash on a flashy office instead of building the actual product. Or the executive who launches a hostile takeover without doing their homework. It's pure aggression, with zero intelligence behind it. And then you've got the total opposite, which is just as deadly, cowardice. This is the leader who's so terrified of losing what they have that they can never make a bold move to gain more. Their fear of failure actually guarantees it. And this, the source says, leads to capture. This is that big old company that fails to innovate because it's just too comfortable with how things are. Or the manager who keeps pouring resources into a failing project just to avoid admitting they made a mistake. In a world that moves this fast, just standing still is probably the most dangerous move you can make. The third flaw. This one's a big one. a hasty temper. A leader with this weakness is basically a puppet, and you can bet their opponent is holding the strings. They get so easily provoked by insults or small setbacks that they end up making these rash, emotional decisions instead of calm, strategic ones. And in the digital age, oh man, this is an absolute killer. A single tweet, one critical article, and you can bait a leader into a huge, unforced error. They can turn a tiny issue into a massive crisis, all by themselves. If an opponent knows you have a hasty temper, they will play you like a fiddle.
Okay, number 4 is a little sneakier. It's called a delicacy of honor. This is the leader whose ego is so fragile that they just cannot handle shame or criticism. Every single decision they make becomes about protecting their own reputation, not about actually winning. They're way more concerned with looking strong than being effective.
This reframes so much of what we see, right? Think about that leader who just doubles down on a bad decision instead of admitting they were wrong. Is that a sign of resolve, or is it just a fragile ego that's terrified of looking weak? This flaw makes learning impossible, and it pretty much guarantees you'll make the same mistake again and again. And finally, we get to the 5th flaw, and this is the one that so often pretends to be a good thing: over-solicitude. This leader is so worried about people not liking them that they avoid all the necessary conflicts and tough calls. Their desire to be liked completely paralyzes them, which ends up exposing their entire team to worry and trouble. We all know this person. It's the classic nice boss who just can't bring themselves to fire a toxic employee. So what happens? The high performers get frustrated and leave, and the whole team's effectiveness just craters. Their compassion for one person becomes, in effect, cruelty to everyone else. These 5 faults, they are the root cause of so much failure. So, okay, with all these flexible opponents and our own internal flaws, how do you even defend yourself? Well, the answer is a final, really powerful shift in your mindset. You have to focus on proactive strength, not reactive hope.
This one sentence, honestly, this could be the cornerstone of the entire elite mindset. Don't hope your competitors fail. Don't hope the market turns in your favor. Don't hope your opponent doesn't discover your weakness. Instead, build your own readiness. Make your position so strong, your strategy so sound, and your team so prepared that you are, for all intents and purposes, unassailable. True security never comes from hope. It comes from what you can control, your own preparation.
And that brings us to the final question, the one I want you to take with you. As you look at this list of 5 faults: recklessness, cowardice, a hasty temper, a delicacy of honor, and over-solicitude, be honest with yourself. Which one is your default setting? Which one secretly takes over your decisions when you're under pressure? Because knowing your own fatal flaw, that's the very first step to mastering the general's discipline.